Hi, friend. I have another pretty rough one for us today.
No, kitty.
Yeah, we're traveling back to 1966 Wales in the United Kingdom. And if you would, picture a tranquil Welsh village on a cold, foggy morning. You bundle up, leave the warmth of the coal stove burning in your home, and wave goodbye to your mother. The ground is damp with rain, but spirits are pretty high. Holidays are coming up, and it's a half day of school. Who doesn't love a half day at school?
Love it.
You're trotting along with your classmates, talking about what you're going to do over break. Maybe you're trading candies or other little treats that you have. And nothing draws your attention through the mist at the massive spoil tips looming over your little village. Why would you look up there? They're perfectly safe, even with all this rain. The National Coal Board assured you as much. It's an ordinary day. You could even call it a good day. That is until a rumble in the distance warns too late of a disaster about to strike. In an instant, you find yourself buried alive under a heap of spoil and pray someone can get to you before you run out of air.
My God, I have chills. Fucks me up so bad. Like in The Crown when they covered that was the first time I ever heard of it, and it made me sick to my stomach. Welcome to Wreckage and Ruins. Each week, we investigate disasters man made and natural, legendary last stands, medical mishaps, and everything in between. Each of the ruins unfold into a story, and we're here to understand why it happened and what came after.
We're your hosts, Cece and Kitty, and Aberfan was a total disaster. Aberfan is now a former coal mining village situated towards the bottom of Taff Valley in South Wales. The Taff River runs from north to south through the village, and the 25-mile or 40-kilometer no longer in use Glamorganshire Canal and railway run parallel to the river. The canal was initially built in 1794 to ferry supplies like iron, coal, and limestone from the valleys to Cardiff, where they were going to be shipped around the world. And in 1886, a 4-mile, 6-kilometer section of the canal was closed around Aberfan because the canal was kind of sinking into the ground from the mining activity. And they made a decision to protect Aberfan and close that section of the canal. The rest of the canal was closed entirely by 1951 after being made obsolete by rail traffic, lack of business, and lack of repair. And the canal is not super relevant to this episode, but it is a bit of important history about this village itself and how it kind of came to be what it is.
Okay.
There's mining happening all in this village, and the way that the mining material made its way to be shipped out was through this canal. And so this canal was very vital to the formation of this village before railway started.
Okay, that makes sense.
In 1966, Aberfan was a bustling coal mining town. The people there were employed mostly by the Mether Vale Colliery, which was founded in 1869 when John Nixon of Nixon's Taylor and Company diverted the Taff River and sank the first mine shaft, which reached a depth of 1,626 feet or 1,400 meters. By the way, a colliery is a coal mine and its associated buildings.
Okay.
The first coal was produced there in 1875, and a second shaft soon followed. And avoiding getting too deep into the history of this mine, it was sold to Powell Dufferin Steam Company, who ran it from early 1935 until it was nationalized and taken over by the National Coal Board in 1947. And nationalization is when a government takes ownership of private assets or industries that are considered key resources or infrastructure. Sometimes nationalization is done to ensure national energy, security, improve worker safety, promote scientific development, or to maintain control over strategic industry. In the UK, there were kind of mixed feelings about whether or not this was going to be good or bad for miners. Get too deep into that either because it's a whole other can of worms.
Mm,
But it was nationalized right around right around World War II.
okay.
The mine was also electrified in the early 60s, and a new underground coal conveying system was installed there to get things out of the mine. So when you have spoil and you have coal, you need to get it out. And they did that with electrified systems rather than with like gasoline or kerosene. That was done for worker safety.
Okay. Okay, cool.
By 1966, the coal industry was in decline, though. Consumers were starting to prefer oil, and several coal pits were closed down or in the process of being closed down because people wanted oil rather than coal in their homes to keep warm.
Hmm.
I can't say that I blame them. I would much rather carry a can of oil for my furnace than shovel a bunch of coal in. Coal's
Yeah,
dirty, it's got a lot of soot.
right.
And have you been to, like, London or Pittsburgh or any of those big cities that had a lot of coal?
You know, there my family on my dad's side were all coal miners, and so there were a lot of coal mines, in the area that we're from in Pennsylvania, but I don't know that I've ever been to a big city with a lot of coal. I don't know that
So,
I've
like
ever been to Pittsburgh.
okay, well, first, you would love Pittsburgh, but, I went to PIMS
Yes.
in Pittsburgh, and on some of the buildings in Pittsburgh, you can still see the, like, coal soot where the buildings haven't been cleaned.
Wow, okay.
And so a lot of coal is being burned, but when coal is burned, it's very dirty and like marks buildings black. Then when they do clean them, that you get like this beautiful kind of like sandstone color, but that is totally covered up in a lot of cases and you can still see the black from where there was so much coal in Pittsburgh.
That's wild.
And so that was a really big problem in London and really all over the world is you just have a lot of like dirty coal burn that's dirtying up your city.
Mm,
So people were kind of making the switch to oil, which burns a little bit cleaner and is not so difficult for people to use in their homes.
that makes sense.
Aberfan was no different. While still busy, its workforce had shrunk to a mere 800 workers from their peak of more than 2,000. The colliery ran out of tipping space on the valley floor in 1916, so 7 spoil tips were constructed on a hill above the village of Aberfan, containing about 2.1 million cubic meters or 35 million cubic feet of spoil, which is just a lot. It's difficult for me to conceptualize that, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Spoil is waste material removed during mining. It's usually rock, soil, and coal that is too fine to use, as well as other materials that are deemed not useful and disregarded as waste. And a spoil tip is a mound or heap of spoil that has been dumped in a systematic way. So it's junk, basically, from the coal mine that has been dumped into a big pile.
Okay.
Tip 7 was the active heap being used in October of 1966, despite numerous complaints made to the National Coal Board regarding dangers associated with it. One complaint was a petition filed by Pantglas School in 1963. That complaint is titled Danger from Coal Slurry Being Tipped at the Rear of Pantglas School. The writer of this letter invited the National Coal Board District Works Superintendent, Mr. Ritchie, to come and see the spoil tip for himself, and he also reminded Mr. Ritchie of a previous incident with a similar spoil at a nearby quarry. I
Okay, so
couldn't find a lot of
there's proof that these spoil tips are dangerous.
right, and there was kind of a similar nature at a nearby quarry, and I couldn't find a lot of information about that, but basically that spoil tip collapsed on itself and caused problems at a nearby quarry. And so people were like, "Hey, this spoil is pretty similar to that spoil, and we're not feeling very good about its position on top of this hill right over top of our village."
Okay. Ooh.
The National Coal Board's attitude on this was that all tips were known to slide a little bit and that most of them were not of much concern. People who lived under tip number 7 were concerned because
Yeah, I
one,
would
they
be
lived right
concerned.
underneath it.
Yeah.
Me too. There's a massive pile of loose soil right up the road from my house or right up the hill from my house. I would be very concerned about that.
Yeah.
What is holding that in place? Nothing.
Oh my god.
This particular spoil tip was started in 1958 on an outcropping of sandstone that had streams and underwater springs. By 1966 was 111 feet tall or 34 meters and contained 229,300 cubic meters or 8 million-ish cubic feet of spoil. Again, a lot.
Yeah.
Tip number 7 had also slipped before when it collapsed in on itself from the top and formed a bulge at the base, which was trapping spring water inside the tip. Trapping spring water is really bad in this situation because the waste inside the tip started to mix with that trapped water and it eventually liquefied the entire inside of the tip and it turned it into a thick black liquid that the local people called slurry. Yeah,
I don't know that I
it's
care
it's
for that.
all not looking good.
No.
The National Coal Board ignored the concerns of the citizens living and working in Aberfan, and people who dared make a complaint did so at great risk for themselves. A lot of people did not offer up their concerns because of the fear that the National Coal Board would think that it was too much trouble to manage all of this tipped spoil and just close the mine altogether, kind of putting their town out of business and causing high levels of unemployment. So people went about their daily lives living under this spoil tip, knowing that it was dangerous, but being too afraid of unemployment to make a fuss about their safety.
Ugh, that's a really crappy choice to have to make.
It is a very crappy choice to have to make because this is a coal mining town. The entire purpose of this town is mining coal and yeah, there's a butcher shop and there's, clothing and general stores and all of these things and there's a bustling little town here, but that bustling little town exists because of coal.
Right.
And so if the National Coal Board closes this thing down because too many people make a fuss, well, then there'll be no money to keep the butcher open, all of that.
Right. Yeah.
So rather than make a fuss, they said, okay, the National Coal Board says it's safe, it must be safe. On the morning of October 21st, 1966, it was rainy and cold like it had been for a few weeks. At 7:30 a.m., it was noticed that the tip had sunk 20 feet, most likely due to the heavy rain engorging the spring beneath it. As the morning wore on, 240 children waved to their mothers as they headed off into the dense fog for their half day of school. The Pantglas Junior School was brimming with excitement about the break, marking the halfway point for their semester, and the children attended a morning assembly before going to their classrooms. Then, a worker on the tip who thought he was seeing things said, then it sort of came up out of the depression and turned itself into a wave down towards the mountain, towards Aberfan village, into the mist.
Oh my god.
Seconds later, the bottom gave way. In the school, the lights began to flicker and a loud roar could be heard coming through the fog. Rocks, trees, and homes were swept up by this 40-foot or 12-meter wave of slurry screaming down the mountain. The power of sliding spoil busted a water main, which only increased the viscosity and speed, topping out at 80 or 128 kilometers per hour. Before it swallowed the school at 9:13 a.m., the children had been away from their homes for 20 minutes at most.
Oh my gosh.
Women were already clawing at the jagged ruins with their bare hands and whatever tools they could find, trying to reach children who could be heard crying inside by the time first responders reached the school.
Oh my god.
At 9:25 a.m., the police station received a devastating call. It said, I have been asked to inform that there has been a landslide at Pantglas. The tip has come down on the school. The fire department received a similar phone call seconds later. Yvonne Price was one of the first officers on the scene, and she recalled seeing a teacher screaming on her knees outside the school. And she asked her, had the children gone home? And the teacher said, no, they're all in there.
That's horrifying.
It's horrifying and it's devastating. And not that this wouldn't be awful with anybody involved, but because it's children.
Yeah, particularly with the kids.
Children are supposed to be safe at school. Minors had to be brought up from the deep shafts before they could make their way to the school. And once they arrived at the school, they started directing the initial digging because they had experience in digging and preventing further collapse. But time was against them because floodwater poured out of the broken water main into the canal and into the town. The broken water main started flooding the town and it was impeding traffic and rescuers. And there were about 9 meters or 30 feet of slurry sitting on top of this school, and it was hardening by the second, and the children inside were running out of air.
Oh my God, Kitty.
The first victims were taken to St. Tidville Hospital no later than 9:50 a.m. By 11 a.m., 21 children and 5 adults had arrived at the hospital for treatment. One child pulled from the wreckage was alive when they were pulled from the wreckage but died on their way to the hospital. And 9 others were pulled from the school during this time period, but they were already deceased before the rescuers could reach them. Their bodies were sent to East Glamorgan Hospital. The final child rescued from the wreckage alive was Jeff, and no other person was found alive after Jeff. Jeff spent an agonizing 90 minutes gasping for breath and unable to move away from the girl who lay dead on his shoulder as he listened to the chaos around him grow more and more quiet.
Poor Jeff.
Yes, Jeff was in a precarious position. He was in a space where he could breathe, where he could see light. And so he knew that one of his classmates was laying dead on his shoulder. And Jeff also had the misfortune of listening as his classmates cried and then slowly fell silent because they were running out of air and slipping into unconsciousness before they passed away.
I have chill.
Jeff had air, but he had all of this debris pressing on his stomach. So he was in dire straits, but not as bad as some of his other classmates who did not have the air pocket he did.
Oh my gosh.
Of the 34 students in his class, Jeff was one of only 4 survivors. The BBC opened their 10:30 a.m. segment with the story of the accident, and thousands of people traveled to Aberfan to unearth the school. Unfortunately, in reality, their presence only impeded the efforts of the miners and the trained rescue crews.
That sucks because you want to look for the helpers, but sometimes you have to trust that the people who need to be helping are going to be helping. Does that make sense?
Right, because you want to go help, you want to go dig, but at the same time, as a random person just showing up here digging, you could create further collapse.
Right.
And the miners and people who are there already digging know what needs to be done. They know how to dig and they know how to do this kind of quickly. And stopping to teach you to say, like, hey, don't dig there or hey, dig this way is really just slowing them down. Yeah, you do. You want to come and help. Who wouldn't want to come and help under these
Right.
circumstances? But at the same time, if you're not experienced in this type of rescue, maybe you should sit this one out.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, it really is. And especially because it's children. You want to rescue children. Who doesn't want to rescue children?
Yes, exactly. Ugh.
This episode is sponsored by Total Foot Care of the New River Valley, PC, located in Parisburg, Virginia. Dr. Meredith and her dedicated team focus on the overall health and well-being of your feet. They prioritize non-surgical treatment and offer the best possible care for patients of all ages. You can expect a friendly, warm, professional, and comfortable environment when you visit their office. Total Foot Care addresses a wide range of foot and ankle ailments. Services include, but are not limited to, diabetic foot care, wound care, treatment for ingrown and fungal nails, management of sports and hiking related injuries, as well as care for corns, calluses, and tendonitis. To learn more, visit their website, totalfootcarenrv.com, or find the link on the Wreckage and Ruins website sponsor page. Be sure to tell them we sent you. Charles Nunn reached Aberfan at 10:30 a.m. to act as the senior identification officer working in the temporary morgue set up in Aberfan's chapel. Upon his arrival, he found that the Salvation Army volunteers and nurses were already carrying children into the chapel and washing away black grime from their bodies. Nunn got to work immediately writing descriptions of the children and logging their possessions, and found that many had suffocated under the weight of the spoil and had no visible damage to their bodies, making the process of their identification easier. Others sadly had suffered catastrophic injury and had to be identified through dental records or the toys that they carried with them.
My god. Using toys to identify you,
Really hard.
that's devastating.
The chapel was very quickly overwhelmed with the dead, and a second morgue had to be opened at Cabell Aberfan, another nearby church. So now we have two churches involved as morgues. Parents and relatives lined up outside the chapels and waited to be led through the chapel viewing until they recognized their loved one. So you're being wound through the pews until you recognize the person that you're looking for, which I can't even imagine the devastation.
No, and just feeling scared to find your loved one, but you also wanna know where they are. That has to be a
Exactly.
really complicated feeling on top of everything.
It does. Once people had identified their loved one, they then had to make their way to the fish and chip shop 5 doors down, where burial and cremation certificates were being issued. The fish and chip shop was selected because it was nearby, well known, and easy for families and out of town officials to locate.
Hmm.
The identification of the 144 bodies took a total of 15 days. The dead included 116 children, 5 teachers, and 23 residents of cottages and terrace houses above and around the school. The ages of the victims ranged from 3 months to 82 years old. Survivors of the disaster faced inadequate aftercare. PTSD and therapy after traumatic events were just starting to be understood, and many people were plagued with survivor's guilt, while others couldn't help but harbor bitterness towards the families whose children had survived. Right, and that's a
I'm speechless. Everything this is all so terrible. It's just layers and layers and layers of terrible.
it really is. Survivor's guilt is awful for the people who are suffering from it. And then I can't imagine the other families who are feeling bitter because
Yeah,
I understand the bitterness. I do because, why did your child survive when mine didn't? But
right.
at the same time, I can't imagine the overwhelming guilt that they must have felt for feeling that way.
Right. That's it's also complicated.
So there's a lot of complicated grief here.
Yeah, there is.
And a lot of people were asking the question, why would God let this happen? And it led some of the people of Aberfan to actually lose their faith.
That's terrible.
It is.
It's terrible to live your life with religion and rely on it and then have something happen that makes you question it. I know that a lot of people aren't religious or whatever, but I think losing your religion because of a terrible traumatic experience is an extra level of, sad.
Just sad and awful.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, there was a mass burial on October 27th, and flowers were sent all over the world, arranged in the shape of a huge cross on the hillside where the landslide took place.
Wow.
At this mass burial, 81 children and 1 adult were buried in 2 mass graves in the Brintov Cemetery, which is on a hill that overlooks Aberfan. Queen Elizabeth II was deeply touched by the loss of life, and she visited the town to show her support after the funeral. But it is said that she often deeply regretted not visiting Aberfan immediately, like Prince Philip, Lord Snowdon, and Prime Minister Harold Wilson had done. She did not want the commotion associated with her presence to further hinder rescue efforts. So she chose to stay away so the rescue could take place and the funeral service could be focused on the lives lost rather than her presence.
That's actually fair. That had to have been a hard choice because you wanna show them that you're supporting them and grieving with them, but you also don't want to complicate anything or make anyone's life harder. So, that's interesting. That was also interesting being covered in the crown.
Right. And, when you think about it, they want her there because, she's their monarch, and her being there to show her support and that she cares for them and that she cares for the children that were lost is really important. But at the same time, you have to consider anytime royalty shows up somewhere, there is a circus.
Right.
It's kind of like I remember the massacre at Virginia Tech,
Mhm.
and when the president came, it was it was really nice that he came and that he was showing support for the community, but at the same time, there was just so much chaos around his presence
Yeah.
that it took away from the victims, and I don't think that that's what he intended when he came to show his support, but at the same time, that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it sounded like she probably that might have been a good idea. Just
She did the right thing, but at the same time, it said that she regretted that decision not going there immediately.
yeah, that's interesting.
On the other hand, Lord Robins, the chair of the National Coal Board, whose presence would have been helpful in many ways, did not feel the need to go to Aberfan immediately. He did not attend the funeral, and he worked to define the disaster as a tragic accident rather than a preventable act of negligence on the part of the National Coal Board. He obscenely stated over and over that it was impossible to know that there was a spring in the heart of this tip, but everyone knew that to be false. And the National Coal Board's own survey maps showed that they did indeed know about the spring. And investigation held no one accountable for the ineptitude leading to the accident in Aberfan, and instead the total absence of tipping policy was given the blame.
That's so unacceptable.
It is.
Even if you just say like, "Hey, this is messed up, the spoiled tip thing, that's messed up, that can never happen again, nobody was paying attention to this. They were hollering at you to change it for a long time and nobody listened. And now all these people, including children, are dead." And they just brushed
All
it off.
these people, mostly children, are dead.
Mostly children. My God.
And really driving that home, they knew that this tip had a spring under it, and they lied about that until they couldn't lie about it anymore. And their own records debunked their claims. The residents and the workers complained about the instability and the danger from this tip. And it had slipped previously, so they knew it was dangerous, but the National Coal Board ignored it.
My God.
144 people lost their lives in a completely preventable tragedy. Rather than hold accountable the deaf ears to concern, the official cause and blame was a lack of policy regarding safe tipping standards. A policy, which I would like to point out, should have been made by the people at the National Coal Board who were not held accountable at all for this accident.
Of course not.
The cherry on top of this, the whole thing, is that Robins offered his resignation and it was rejected.
So he tried to fall on the sword and they were like, "No, don't worry about it." Is that the way it was?
Pretty much.
God.
And he actually went on to chair a review of health and safety for workers in
Yeah,
relation to mining.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
My God. No.
It gets worse before it gets worse. A disaster fund was set up for Aberfan with donations reaching a total of 1,750,000 British pounds, which in today's money would be 28,737,000 British pounds, or roughly about $37 million. Yeah, $37 million
Oh my
in US
gosh.
money.
It's a lot.
So a pretty good sized disaster fund.
Yeah.
The problem is that the management of this fund was its own separate disaster, and survivors actually had to fight a legal battle to gain access to the funds that had been taken over by the government.
That makes me sick. Oh my God.
Yeah,
What the
the
hell, Kitty?
I'm only reporting the facts.
Okay. Well, I hate it. Okay, thank you.
I didn't write the policy. I'm only reporting the facts.
Right. Ugh.
The villagers were initially denied funding to pay for headstones and grave markers through the fund. And parents were very rudely asked, exactly how close were you to your child? when they started seeking funds in relation to the disaster. And if you were found to not have been close to them, you are not going to be compensated. And what I really want to know is who asks that? What do you mean, how close was I to my child?
And how do you quantify that or qualify that? Whoever came up with that, that's dumb, and that's my personal opinion, and I think that's dumb.
I agree with
So
you
stupid.
100%.
Ugh, yeah, right.
They wound up not using that system. And then the National Coal Board offered £50 per person who had died in the tragedy. They were, of course, met with backlash. And then they generously offered £500 per person instead.
The fact that they keep making these crappy decisions and then having to go back, like, straight to jail.
Yeah, well, just for reference, in today's money, that would be about 821 British pounds or 1,061 United States dollars. And the National Coal Board thought that any amount larger than that would have negatively impacted the working class recipients because they were not used to having large sums of money.
Screw you. Oh my god.
Yeah, it enraged me to read that. It enraged me to write it. It enraged me all over again to tell you about it now. Your child died, and we want to know how close you were to your child, and we're going to give you £50. Well, no, we'll give you £500 or, $1,000 because your child died. But we don't want to give you more than that because if we give you more than that, like, how will you handle it? Because you're not used to having that much money.
Right. So there was, you know, more than $37 million, or yeah, 37 million US dollars. And they, for the 144 people that died, they wanted to give £500 each, and that's it?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
The people were also treated totally like they were irrational when they asked that the other 6 spoil tips that were around spoil tip 7 be removed from the top of the mountain because the National Coal Board told the villagers that they were perfectly safe.
Oh my god.
Again.
Oh my god. Tell that to the families of the 144 people who died.
Yeah, I was pretty appalled about that because hello, you told us they were safe before and now we have 144 dead people in this village. 116 of those people are children, and I can't even imagine the torture of looking up at that hill and seeing those every day wondering if they were going to fall down on you next.
No, no, that has to be traumatic in and of itself, looking at those every day after you've experienced loss. Or even if you didn't lose anyone, just the fear.
Of
I
like, am I
can't
going to be
fathom.
next?
Right. Oh my god.
So the National Coal Board refused to cover the cost of removing those tips. And the Charity Commission agreed to let £150,000 of the relief fund be used to cover the cost of removing the tips.
Hello?
So the money that was supposed to be for the people who were surviving this accident, a relief fund for them, was used to remove the tips instead of the National Coal Board removing the tips.
Like,
97, the Labor government said that this was an injustice and they repaid this disaster fund, but it really kind of feels like too little too late.
yeah, what, 30 years later?
Yeah,
Yeah, no. I'm glad that somebody came around and was like, "Wait, that was really messed up, but I wish it had happened immediately."
like I said, too little too late. And while we're on the list of things that would absolutely not be covered by the National Coal Board, they refused to cover the cost of rebuilding the chapel that had been used as a temporary morgue.
My god.
And once again, that money came out of the disaster fund, but not until 1970.
So they had to continue going to the chapel that they had used as the temporary morgue where they saw all of their deceased friends and family members, and they wanted a new one to start fresh, and then they couldn't because the National Coal Board.
Yeah, well, you also have to imagine that the inside of that chapel had some damage to it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's gotta be blood and coal dust, and then on top of all of that, just the memory.
Yeah. Oh my god, Kitty.
They passed legislation in 1969 as a direct result of Aberfan to enact strict tipping policies to kind of prevent this disaster from ever occurring again. And that legislation is called the Mines and Quarries or Tips Act. It defined what a tip was, and it outlined duties for owners and managers. And it also did something really important, which was grant power to inspectors to ensure the safety of the tips, along with define rules for what to do if a tip was found to be unstable or if that tip was no longer in use. And like we've said before, and we'll say again many times, safety regulations are written in blood.
They are.
In this case, it's written in the blood of children,
God.
but written in blood.
Yeah, children's blood. That's how many pull up the thesaurus so I can keep saying different words for, like, horrifying and devastating.
Disturbing and
Yeah,
just all of the things that this is. Today, Aberfan looks much different. The mine and spoil tips are long gone. White granite arches stand in the cemetery above the hillside in two rows as a monument marking the graves of the children lost. The disaster fund maintains both the cemetery and the memorial garden where the school previously stood. This is one of those times where tragedy feels completely avoidable, especially when you look at the layers of negligence and bureaucracy that led to this disaster. It's sort of easy to see how 144 lives were lost.
negligent is 100% the term that I'm thinking for them. Yeah, total negligence.
Total,
Before and
complete.
after. Negligent and not making sure that these people didn't die, and then negligent in their duty to care for the people that were left in the wreckage.
Absolutely, because not only was a school full of children destroyed, houses around this school were destroyed.
Yeah.
To me, a disaster fund should pay for monuments, should pay for funerals, should pay for all of these things. And the fact that these families had to fight to have those things covered is its own injustice. And then the disaster funds were sort of used for rudimentary psychology, but not to great degree. And this wasn't, I'm sorry your classmates died all around you, get over it situation. This is lifelong therapy.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not something that you get over, something that you just forget. Survivor's guilt is a very real, very difficult thing for a lot of people to overcome. And I understand that we didn't have adequate psychology practices at this time to deal with that, but the disaster fund was not used appropriately to make sure that people received the care that they needed.
Absolutely. Ugh.
And the loss of this 116 children and 28 adults indelibly marked this small Welsh village. And yes, out of this wreckage came new legislation, the Mines and Quarries or Tips Act, which we talked about. But is that enough? Yes, it's designed to prevent this kind of disaster from ever happening again, but is it enough?
Right.
And I feel that the story of Aberfan is a powerful lesson and that we cannot sacrifice safety for profit. And the memorial garden and the white arches on the hillside there stand as a permanent tribute to those lost, but as a perpetual warning to the powerful that just because you are empowered does not mean that you are not responsible for the people who live in the shadow of industrialization, nationalized or not.
Holy cow. One of my bits that I do is if somebody's complaining about something, I'll be like, call them up. So my first thought was like, get the National Coal Board on the phone so I can like give it to them. And I Googled it and apparently it doesn't exist anymore. So that gives me some small comfort to know that it doesn't exist anymore. Because otherwise I would have asked you to get them in a room with me. Get them in a room and shut the door and leave us alone for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just need 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes.
Just 5.
Like,
Dang,
what
Kitty,
the hell?
that was tragic. Um, the Yeah, that episode of The Crown, I remember getting super emotional, um, but it doesn't, like, go into all the details and stuff, it's more about, like, the royal family or whatever. You broke that down really well, and it was terrifying.
Thank you. I learned about this accident too from The Crown, and then as I was reading into it more and more, kind of like I do with every episode, I wound up becoming enraged because it's like, what do you mean that's how they handled it?
It's insane how much that happens, especially with
It is.
incidents, you know, like, if there's a big incident versus some of my episodes are kinda just we talk about, like, a time period or, like, abstract things that happened that were messed up, but, yeah, a lot of these incidents just go to show how bad things can get before change has to happen.
Well, and I'm researching, and one of my in the near future episodes is going to be the Hawk's Nest tunnel disaster in West Virginia.
Mhm.
And that is injustice after injustice. And so many of these things, I would like to think that in a disaster, people are trying to do like the most right thing or the next right thing. But when you read about it and you're looking back in 2026 at these things that have happened, how could you possibly think that that's the right thing?
Right.
Giving families $1,000 because, well, if we give working class people that much money, what will they do with it? It'll
I
disrupt
wouldn't
the
have been able to
economy.
sleep at night. I wouldn't be able to live with myself, I think, if I, like, knowingly did something that messed up, right?
Right, because you lost your child because of negligence. That is one of those things that I feel like, we have $37 million. Well, how much of $37 million can we give you and then still maintain a memorial that we paid for in perpetuity?
Right. Oh, kitty. Thanks, I hated it.
But I know you hate all my episodes.
I love learning from you, but I hate this stuff.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the listeners who came back and listened to us again another week.
Please keep doing it. Please
Yes,
follow us, like all our things, tell your friends about it, and I
and
guess
tell your
we'll
friends, even if it's to tell them, like, what kinda dorks we are.
yeah.
Let them find out.
Yeah, let them make their own decision about that when they listen to every single episode we have on multiple platforms. It's fine.
Yep. But, alright, well, I think this is probably it for today, and, I love telling you all about it, and it's not true, I hated it. I hated telling you all about it. We'll see everybody next week in the aftermath, and until then.
Until then, kitty. If you like our show, please rate, review, and subscribe anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and check out our Patreon for bonus episodes and special content. You can also find us on Instagram. To submit your own disaster stories for listener episodes or to suggest or request a topic, please visit our website at www.wreckageandruins.com. Wreckage and Ruins is researched, written, reported, and edited by us, Cece and Kitty, with music by Tearing Down the Circus. And the show is produced by Wood and Wreckage, LLC. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week in the aftermath.